Welcome to True Echo, where real grit, quiet brilliance, and untold power find a voice. Today's story begins in a garage, but it ends in a revelation that silences doubt, shifts minds, and reminds us that genius doesn't always come with a degree or a title. Sometimes, it comes wearing oil-stained gloves, armed with focus, and a phone instead of a laptop. This is the story of a teenage girl who walked into a man's world, and made it hers. Jeliah Morton didn't ask to be tested that Saturday morning. She'd only planned to spend time with her dad, Donovan, a respected mechanic with over 2 decades of experience, at the restoration shop where he'd worked for years. But the new boss, Wesley Trask, had other ideas. The kind of man who measured competence with ego and dismissed anything outside his narrow idea of experience. Trask wasn't thrilled when Jeliah stepped into the polished, glass-fronted garage in Tempe, Arizona. "This ain't a classroom. Tell your daughter to stay out the way," he barked loud enough for everyone to hear. "No handshake. No eye contact. Just a statement meant to cut." Donovan didn't react. Not with his face anyway. He'd weathered worse from men who thought their last name earned them respect. But beside him, 17-year-old Jeliah heard every word. She didn't flinch. Didn't glare. Just kept wiping her hands with a shop rag and studying the rusted-out Aston Martin V12 in Bay 3. The garage was buzzing with the low hum of tools, music, and the occasional smack of sarcasm. Donovan was tightening a timing belt. Mechanics argued over a Ferrari that hadn't started in weeks. But Jeliah had been watching longer than they realized. "I think that sensor's wired backwards," she said, mostly to herself. Laughter erupted. "We got ourselves a technician, huh?" one of the guys cracked. Another added, "She wants to tell us how to fix the Ferrari too." Donovan opened his mouth, but before he could say a word, Trask stepped in. His voice dripped with mock generosity. "Actually," he said, "let's give her a shot. You think that sensor's off? Great. Fix it. If you're right, I'll clean the whole shop floor with a toothbrush." The room fell into that strange hush, not quiet from respect, but from spectacle. Everyone was watching. Everyone wanted to see her fail. Donovan leaned toward her. "You don't have to." "I know," Jeliah replied. Then she walked to the Ferrari. She didn't hesitate. She didn't bluff. She pulled her braids behind her shoulder, grabbed a pair of gloves, and popped the hood. The engine bay hissed slightly as it opened, like even the car was holding its breath. What she found under that hood wasn't just a tangle of wires and metal. It was chaos disguised as engineering. A job abandoned by too many frustrated hands. "She might want to pull up a YouTube tutorial," someone muttered. "Take your time," Trask said smugly. "We've only spent 3 weeks on that thing." She didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the engine with a clarity that made grown men nervous. Not because she was confident, but because she was right. "It's been touched by too many people," she said quietly. "Ignition feeds rerouted. Sensors barely getting 8 volts, it needs 12. That got attention. One of the older guys raised a brow. "She's guessing." "She's not," Donovan said, his voice calm but laced with something firmer. "She's been doing this since she was a kid." Even Reese, the wiry, ball-cap-wearing loudmouth of the crew, stepped closer. "I want to see where this goes," he murmured. Jeliah worked with control. Not like she was solving a puzzle, but like she already knew the answer and was just retracing the steps. She called for AT-15. Only Reese moved. The tool clinked onto the nearby table. She didn't thank him. She was too deep in the zone for politeness. The shop watched as she worked the wires, pulled a multimeter from her backpack, her own, not borrowed, and clipped it to the leads. She brought her own tools, one of them whispered. "Garage at home," Donovan said. "She's been building since she was 12. Then came the part no one saw coming. "Let's be clear," Trask interrupted, trying to keep control. If you screw this up, you take full responsibility. If I fix it, Jeliah said without looking up, do you take responsibility for wasting 3 weeks? That hit hard. She unplugged the faulty connector, cleaned the dust, and traced the current with the kind of intensity that made everyone step back. Then she stood. It's reading 9.8 volts now. Still low, but stable. Reese blinked. How the hell? Reversed the flow from the secondary relay, she said. It was starving itself. Even the seasoned techs paused. Someone whispered, I never even thought of that. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't showing off. She was fixing. Key to ignition, she called. Donovan slid into the driver's seat. The dash blinked, no codes. I need to reprogram the idle mapping, she continued. The ECU's running defaults. Doesn't match the airflow mods. She figured that out, one guy muttered. She didn't answer. Already connecting a cord to the diagnostic port. The app she opened wasn't flashy, it was lines of numbers, raw code. She scrolled through like it was music. You can reprogram that from your phone? Reese asked. Yeah, she replied. Remotely. Not ideal, but faster. Trained techs couldn't figure this out, Trask muttered. They weren't reading the correction table right, she replied, still working. Force throttle offset without recalibrating airflow. Trask had no comeback. Jeliah adjusted the mapping, reset the idle slope to 7.2, and cut cold start injection delay by 2 seconds. Try it, she said. Donovan turned the key. The Ferrari groaned but didn't catch. Almost, someone muttered. Secondary coil, she said. It's misaligned. You sure? No. But I'm not leaving it like this. She didn't ask for permission. She grabbed the socket set, opened the ignition housing, adjusted the coil seating, and tightened it. Every movement fluid. Every decision sound. Try again. Donovan turned the key. The Ferrari didn't cough. It roared. A deep, throaty growl filled the shop like a long-dead beast awakening. No one moved. The idle held. Steady. Controlled. Alive. Trask stared like he'd seen a ghost. Jeliah turned to him. You wanted it to run. It's running. For a few seconds after the engine roared to life, no one said a word. The V12 idled low, smooth as silk, almost defiant in its newfound precision. Donovan stood from the driver's seat, his eyes locked on the engine, then slowly turned toward his daughter. There was a gleam in his expression, one of pride, but also disbelief. Not because he didn't think she could do it, but because of how effortlessly she had. I didn't even teach you that coil trick, he said quietly. You did, Jeliah replied, her voice soft. You just didn't know I was watching. That one landed deep. Donovan chuckled and shook his head. Reese let out a low whistle and crossed his arms. You always watching, he said with a grin. The mechanics, once sarcastic and dismissive, had fallen silent. Their skepticism had been replaced by something else, something unfamiliar. Respect. One of the older guys leaned down and checked the digital gauges. Throttle response is clean. Temps holding. AFR. 12.7, someone called out. She's dead on, the man confirmed. The engine hummed behind them, like it was proud too. Trask, meanwhile, didn't say a word. He stood there, jaw clenched, arms crossed tightly across his chest, as if he could squeeze back the control he'd just lost. You ever think maybe the issue wasn't the machine? Jeliah asked, not sarcastically, just stating a fact. Maybe it was the way you were looking at it. That question hovered in the air, heavier than it should have been. Because everyone knew, especially Trask, that she was right. As the awe spread across the garage, someone finally asked what had been on their minds from the moment she picked up that multimeter. "You ever think about doing this for real?" Reese asked, leaning on the nearest workbench. Jeliah blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, full-time. As a career. Shops would line up to hire someone like you." Donovan looked at her too, waiting for the answer. For once, she hesitated. "Maybe," she said. "I like building stuff. I like it when something broken finally clicks." "You've got a gift," Reese replied. Trask muttered something under his breath, but no one cared to ask him to repeat it. Then, just as the moment was beginning to settle, Jeliah walked around the car, reached into her backpack, and pulled out a grease-smudged envelope. She handed it to Reese. Curious, he unfolded it and scanned the contents. He froze. "No way," he murmured. "What is it?" someone asked. Reese turned the letter around so the whole garage could see. Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Official letterhead. Full academic scholarship. Mechanical engineering. Modular combustion engine prototype. Accepted at 17. The garage collectively exhaled. "You got into MIT?" Victor asked, voice cracking slightly. Jeliah nodded. "They offered the scholarship last month. I submitted a modular design, 30% less waste output. Built it in the backyard with scrap parts." For the first time all day, even the engine seemed to go quieter. The shop fell into stunned silence. Not just because she got into MIT. But because no one expected it. They had all assumed she was just a curious kid tagging along with her dad. And yet here she was, engineering her own engines, reprogramming ECUs from a phone, spotting electrical flaws in minutes, and walking into one of the world's most prestigious schools. "You built your own engine, from scraps?" someone asked, half in awe. Jeliah gave a small shrug. "Didn't have much else to work with." "You should have led with that," Reese said, still grinning like he'd just seen a magician. "I didn't think I had to," Jeliah replied. This time, they didn't just respect her, they admired her. Because she wasn't just smart. She was humble. Dangerous combination. But Trask, he wasn't finished. "That doesn't mean she's an expert," he muttered, still trying to salvage something. "I never said I was," Jeliah said plainly. "You're the one who made it a dare." Donovan stepped forward, voice calm but unshakably firm. "You challenged her, Wes." "And she answered." "She got lucky," Trask snapped. Reese fired back before anyone else could. "Luck doesn't reprogram an ECU or trace a misrouted feed. We saw it. All of us." Trask was losing the room, and he knew it. The looks from the other techs weren't subtle anymore. They weren't looking to him for leadership. They were looking at Jeliah like she'd just redefined their understanding of the job. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she said after a moment. "I just didn't want my dad to look bad." That cut deeper than anything else she could have said. Donovan didn't flinch. He stood tall, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were full of pride. Reese whistled under his breath. First person in this shop who didn't overthink that engine. Just saw the problem. Fixed it. Another mechanic added, "Been working 30 years and I missed what she caught in 15 minutes. Trask tried again. "She's not trained." "Neither were half the guys you hired," Jeliah said coolly. That shut him up. Donovan finally spoke again. "She's been rebuilding engines since she was a kid. Started fixing things I didn't even know were broken." "How long she been doing this?" someone asked. "Since I was 12, Jeliah answered. A mechanic in the back gave a soft whistle. Damn. Trask, who had built his authority on years of being the smartest one in the room, now looked like he didn't even belong in the building. But still, he couldn't resist one last jab. "You're saying you taught yourself?" "I watched my dad," Jeliah said. Took stuff apart. Put it back. Messed up a lot. Learned more from that than anything else. Rick, one of the older guys, nodded slowly. That's how most of us learned. She's one of us, whether you like it or not. The engine still purred behind them, a soft rhythmic echo of her work. She turned and looked at it one last time. You'll want to change the oil before you run it too long, she said to no one in particular. Viscosity's probably garbage. Even that sounded like wisdom. Even that earned nods. But just before they could ease into comfort, before they could finish celebrating, someone asked the question that hadn't yet been answered. So what are you gonna do next? The question lingered in the heavy, humid air of the garage. So what are you gonna do next? Jeliah didn't answer right away. She was still scanning the Ferrari's engine, like her mind hadn't fully left the wires and connectors. The V12 was idling clean, stable, like it had been waiting years for someone to simply understand it. I graduate in a few months, she finally said. Then I'll head out to Cambridge for the summer program. MIT starts full term in the fall. A few jaws dropped again. Victor, the youngest of the senior techs, blinked twice. You're 17. And you're already locked in at MIT? Yeah, she said quietly. Reese just shook his head, half grinning. Man. I thought I was something when I changed a transmission blindfolded in trade school. You're out here running diagnostics from a phone app and building cleaner engines from junkyard scraps. She didn't gloat. That was the thing that really sank in. For all her knowledge, for all the ground she'd just gained, she didn't need anyone's applause. She hadn't walked into that garage to prove anything. They had dared her to exist in their space. She'd simply refused to shrink. Across the shop, Wesley Trask leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes low. His smirk was gone. So was the power he thought he held. What I still don't get, Victor said, turning toward her, is how you did all that, without a laptop, without a full rig. You just used your phone and your backpack. What else you got in there? Jeliah gave a small smile and unslung the pack from her shoulder. She unzipped it slowly and pulled out each item like it was just part of a regular day. A rugged tablet. A phone. 2 custom diagnostic apps she wrote herself. A beat-up ignition coil she was rewiring for practice. And a sandwich. A sandwich? Reese cracked. Girl came fully loaded. The whole room laughed, not at her, but with genuine warmth this time. The tension that had colored the morning had begun to dissolve. Still, under the chuckles and the shifting energy, there was a growing awareness, something they couldn't shake off. Victor said it first. You didn't just fix that car. You made us look at ourselves. That hung in the air. She tilted her head slightly. How so? Rick, quiet and serious, stepped forward. You made us realize how much we stopped learning. We do things the way we've always done them, because it's easier. You walked in and saw it different. That woke some of us up. Even Trask looked up at that. His eyes flicked from Rick to Reese to Jeliah. And for once, he said nothing. That's what stuck with me, Reese said. You didn't try to out-talk anyone. Didn't need to show off. You just worked. I wasn't trying to change anything, Jeliah replied. I just didn't want my dad to be embarrassed. That quiet admission made Donovan glance over. His face softened, eyes proud, jaw set. He didn't say anything either. He didn't have to. Trask finally broke his silence. You fixed one engine, he said, voice lower now, not sharp, more like a man clinging to what little face he had left. That doesn't mean you're ready for the real thing. Reese turned slowly. You still going with that? I'm just saying, flashes of talent don't equal experience. Reese stepped forward. She diagnosed the problem faster than any of us. She reprogrammed an ECU we couldn't crack. And she got that engine running like it was fresh out the factory. That's not a flash. That's skill. Trained or not. She's not Einstein, Trask muttered. That's when Jeliah reached back into her backpack and pulled out a second envelope. This one was thick, folded, and grease-smudged. She handed it to Reese, who opened it slowly. His eyes widened again. He turned it around for everyone to see. Blueprints. Detailed schematics of a combustion engine redesigned for modular assembly and 30% lower waste output. The same design that got her the scholarship. You built this? Someone asked. Tested it too, she said. Used leftover parts from my dad's projects. Recycled the materials. Got the emissions below EPA targets. Rick gave a slow, impressed nod. You ever think of starting your own shop one day? Jeliah shrugged. Maybe. But right now I want to learn more. Build bigger. Better. Cleaner. Engines, machines, systems, things that last longer and waste less. The room stilled again, not because they didn't believe her, but because they absolutely did. Reese crossed his arms. If MIT is already calling you, I can't wait to see where you end up 5 years from now. Donovan glanced over. She's been building since 15. Rebuilding transmissions in the garage just to see if she could. Victor chuckled. I'm still stuck on the fact she fixed a Ferrari with a backpack. That was when Trask, slowly, almost begrudgingly, uncrossed his arms. She's got skill, he said. Not praise. Not surrender. But a step closer to acknowledgement. Jeliah nodded once. Appreciate that. He looked at Donovan, then at her. If you ever want to work in a shop after school, there's a place here for you. That shocked even some of the guys. Donovan didn't answer. He looked to Jeliah instead. She paused. Then said simply, thanks. But I've got other plans. Not arrogance. Just honesty. Rick leaned on a toolbox, smiling. Can't blame her. Shops like this aren't always the easiest place to grow. No hard feelings, Jeliah said, and meant it. Reese stepped forward one last time. Hey, before you go. She and Donovan turned. Just, don't forget us when you're out there building rocket ships or whatever. Jeliah smiled. You fix a Ferrari, you don't forget the garage. Victor called from behind her. You're a mechanic, Jeliah. No matter what degree they give you. She paused at the door. Maybe. But I think I'm something else too. What's that? Reese asked. A builder, she replied. Of engines. Of ideas. Maybe even of better ways to treat people. And with that, she stepped through the open bay doors. The heat outside hit harder than the tension they'd just left behind. Arizona didn't do subtle in late spring, the sun scorched the pavement, shimmered on windshields, and baked every surface it touched. Donovan opened the truck's passenger door for Jeliah, an old habit, and she slid in without a word. Her backpack settled beside her, the MIT acceptance letter still peeking from the zipper like a quiet badge of war. They didn't talk for the first few minutes. The hum of the V12 still echoed behind them as Donovan pulled onto the road, and the farther they drove from the shop, the more that sound turned into something symbolic. They had left behind more than a fixed car. You think they'll treat the next girl different? Donovan asked, eyes forward on the road. Jeliah leaned back in the seat, the dry wind brushing through the open window. Some of them will, she said. And the others, they'll learn. Back at Trask Automotive, the silence they'd left behind stuck to the walls like oil. Monday came with a shift no one could deny. The usual loud morning banter had dimmed. Mechanics who'd once led with bravado were quieter, more deliberate. No one shouted over anyone. No one joked about who didn't belong. Even Trask was different. He came in later than usual, didn't bark out orders or make sarcastic remarks. He just walked the floor slowly, checking notes, pausing more than speaking. Reese was the first to say it out loud. Leaning over the hood of a '72 Mustang, he glanced up at Victor. "I can't stop thinking about Saturday." Victor didn't look up from the carburetor. "Same. She made us look kind of stiff, huh?" Victor shook his head. "Nah. She made us look like we stopped learning." That wasn't an insult. It was the truth, and it hit harder than anything Trask ever yelled. Rick walked by, torque wrench in hand, and caught the tail end of the conversation. "She didn't shame us. She showed us where we got comfortable. And that was it. That's what stuck with all of them." In a space filled with clanging tools and humming engines, the revelation was stark: none of them had been challenged like that in years. Not by a college. Not by a manager. Certainly not by a teenager with a backpack. Reese wiped his hands, still thinking. "I always thought this trade was about muscle memory. Do it till your hands remember for you." Victor finally looked up. "She made every move count. Like it was, intentional." "I've been coasting on good enough for a while," Reese admitted. They weren't alone. Even Trask had been staying late, quietly. On Sunday, he came in alone and stared at the diagnostic logs Jeliah had generated. He didn't touch anything. He didn't make calls. He just sat with the raw data. The air-fuel correction ratio she'd recalibrated was perfect. The idle mapping flawless. The relay correction, surgical. She hadn't guessed. She had known. In Bay 2, Jameer, the youngest mechanic on the crew, barely out of trade school, sat cross-legged with a manual open on his lap. He was relearning wiring layouts. Pages of notes scattered around him. "She's probably younger than me," he muttered. "And I had to Google how to reset a throttle body." Reese chuckled, passing by. "We all Google stuff. But yeah, she made it look like breathing." "She didn't do it to show off," Rick added, walking over with a socket set. "She did it because someone put her dad on the line. That's what really burned in their memory." "She didn't speak loud," Reese said. "But when something was broken, man, did she speak clear." On Friday, just before the heat climbed past 95, something changed in the break room. Reese walked in carrying a plain cardboard box and set it gently on the old table near the back. From inside, he pulled out a framed photo, grainy but clear. Jeliah, arms deep in the Ferrari's engine bay, her expression focused, unreadable, unstoppable. Beneath the image, a small plaque read, "The day we learned again." Victor walked in and stopped short. "You print that from the security footage?" Reese nodded. It was too real not to keep. Rick entered a moment later, tools still in hand. He paused at the sight of the photo. "She didn't even know we were watching like that." "Exactly," Reese said. "That's what made it real." They hung it above the cracked coffee machine, the one nobody ever bothered to fix. It wasn't about inspiration. It wasn't even about memory. It was a marker. A line in the sand. Meanwhile, back at home, Jeliah sat cross-legged on the garage floor with a half-rebuilt minibike between her knees. The heat didn't faze her. The sun was something she'd worked under for years. She liked the rhythm of tools, the scratch of socket wrenches, the hum of a frame being brought back to life. Donovan stepped outside with 2 cold glasses of lemonade. "Thought you might need a break." "Thanks," she said, wiping her brow with a rag before taking the glass. He leaned against the old tool chest, sipping his own drink. "He called you sharp." "Who?" "Trask." Jeliah snorted, nearly spilling her lemonade. "Doesn't change how he acted." "No," Donovan agreed, "but it means he's thinking about it." "That's something." She finished her drink and set it next to a spark plug box. "You think they'll remember me?" "I think they'll remember what you showed them." She didn't say anything for a moment. Just stared at the grease under her nails. "What's that?" she asked. "That they've got more to learn." And they did. 3 days later, a silver pickup truck pulled into the Mortons' driveway. It was Reese. He didn't call ahead. Didn't text. Just showed up with a manila envelope tucked under his arm and something unresolved in his expression. Donovan opened the front door, surprised but not unfriendly. "Look who it is." "Didn't come to stay long," Reese said. "Just needed to drop something off." "Come in," Donovan offered. Reese stepped inside but only far enough to be polite. A moment later, Jeliah came into the room, hands still greasy, a wrench tucked behind her ear like a pencil. She'd been under the minibike again. "This is for you," Reese said, handing her the envelope. She opened it slowly. Inside was a certificate, thick cardstock, faint watermark of Trask Automotive's logo in the background. Across the top in bold, black font. Honorary Lead Technician, Jeliah Morton. For technical excellence, leadership under pressure, and reminding us all why we started turning wrenches. She stared at it. Not with wide-eyed surprise. Just quiet processing. Then she looked up. "Thank you." Reese scratched his cheek. "Most people spend years trying to earn that." "I wasn't trying to earn anything," she said plainly. "I know," he replied. "That's why it matters." They stood in silence for a moment. Not awkward. Just real. Reese eventually tipped his head, nodded to Donovan, and headed back to his truck. After he left, Jeliah pinned the certificate on the corkboard in her room. Right above the MIT letter. Right next to the first spark plug rebuild tag she'd saved from 3 years ago. Not because she needed proof. But because she understood the weight of symbols. Meanwhile, back at the shop, something had shifted. For the first time in years, the guys started asking more questions. Not out loud. But in quiet moments when no one was watching. Jameer stayed after hours reviewing circuit diagrams. Rick started pulling out his old manuals, flipping through pages he hadn't touched since the early 2000s. Victor retaught himself how to rewire relays, just in case. And Trask? He didn't say much. But he'd stopped correcting people mid-sentence. Stopped talking down. Stopped brushing off younger techs when they asked why a certain sensor was positioned a certain way. 2 months later, he hired his first female apprentice. Not because someone forced him. Not for a headline. But because when her name came up, nobody rolled their eyes. They were ready. Jeliah never returned to Trask Automotive. She didn't need to. Her work had already done its job. What she left behind was more than just a fixed engine. It was a mirror, and it forced everyone who saw it to examine what they'd been missing, who they'd been overlooking, and why. Donovan came home late one Thursday with a smirk on his face. "Rick's got a new nickname at the shop." "What is it?" Jeliah asked, half focused on rebuilding a laptop fan for fun. "The Reborn." She raised an eyebrow. "Apparently, he's relearning everything from diagnostics to fuel mapping." Jeliah gave a small smile. "About time." Donovan chuckled and sat across from her at the workbench. "They're changing. Little by little." "Maybe," she said. "But they're still going to test the next girl." He nodded. "Yeah. But maybe they won't doubt her so fast." They fell into silence, the soft clink of tools filling the background again. It wasn't the kind of silence that needed to be broken. It was the kind that came from understanding, two people who didn't need to explain themselves. Later that week, Trask called Donovan into his office. No barking. No swagger. Just a quiet knock and a gesture to sit. "I was wrong," Trask said, staring at his desk. "About your daughter. About you." Donovan didn't speak. He just waited. "I shouldn't have made it a dare," Trask continued. Shouldn't have turned it into a joke. Donovan nodded. But you did. She's sharp, Trask added. Probably sharper than anyone I've met under 30. Donovan stood. She's more than sharp. She's focused. And she doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. That's the part you didn't see. You think she'll ever come back here? Trask asked, almost hopeful. No, Donovan said with a small shake of his head. But that's not the point, is it? Trask let out a long breath. No. It's not. And he was right. Because the point wasn't just that she fixed the Ferrari. The point was that she made them remember why they started doing this work in the first place. Before the egos. Before the shortcuts. Before the noise. That Saturday, back in the Morton garage, Jeliah leaned over a bench covered in tiny screws, wires, and half-rebuilt sensor modules. She was writing code into a prototype she'd been building off MIT schematics. Her father came in holding 2 drinks. Iced tea this time, he said. Graduation's in 3 weeks. Wild, huh, she replied, taking the glass. You ready? For MIT? Or for the world? Donovan smiled. Both. She took a sip and said, I was born ready. I just had to show the rest of them. And she had. The day of Jeliah's high school graduation was blazing hot. Tempe, Arizona didn't do mild in May. But inside the auditorium, it was cool and humming with excitement. Rows of caps and gowns sat anxiously, while families filled the bleachers with clapping, cheering, and whispered anticipation. Donovan sat near the back, low-key as always, arms folded, eyes locked on the stage. She walked across it with quiet dignity. No showboating. No waving. No need. Because when they announced her name, a ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Some teachers already knew. They'd seen the MIT letter. Some had read her submission to the statewide innovation fair. But few outside her immediate circle knew the full story behind the girl in the navy cap and gown. Fewer still knew she had outperformed most college seniors in a garage 3 months prior. After the ceremony, Donovan found her in the parking lot, backpack over one shoulder, cap already in hand, her tassel dangling from her fingers like it meant something, but not everything. Feel different? He asked. She shrugged. Not really. He smiled. Good. That means you're still grounded. But the truth was, she did feel different. Not because of the diploma. But because of what came after. 2 days later, Donovan received a package at the house. No return address. Inside, a simple black frame containing the now famous photo from the garage, Jeliah, locked in concentration over the Ferrari engine. But this time, someone had added a caption beneath the image in clean, silver lettering. We were watching. We just didn't know what we were seeing. He brought it into her room, leaned it against the wall next to her corkboard. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Because they both knew, this story wasn't ending. It was just the prologue. That weekend, Reese called. Not to ask a favor. Not to drop by. Just to say one thing. We're not the same anymore. Donovan let that sit a beat. You mean the shop? Yeah, Reese said. Guys are actually listening to each other now. Less barking, more asking. Jameer started leading small group sessions on advanced wiring. Rick's mentoring the new kids again. And Trask? He's different too. Different how? Quieter. Watches more than he talks. And, get this, he let a second female apprentice shadow the last week. Didn't say a word. Just stepped back. That was when Donovan said it. She didn't fix a car that day. She changed the rules. Reese chuckled on the other end. Yeah. She did. Back in the garage at home, Jeliah had started building again, this time, not just bikes or tools, but a prototype for a modular scanning device she designed herself. Small. Lightweight. More intuitive than current diagnostic models. She planned to bring it with her to MIT. But that week, she did something unexpected. She returned to Trask Automotive. Not to ask for a job. Not to rub anything in. Just to return the T15 screwdriver she'd borrowed during the Ferrari repair. When she stepped in, the noise didn't stop, but it changed. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. Not with smirks this time, but with something closer to respect. Maybe even gratitude. Reese was the first to greet her. Didn't expect to see you back. Just returning this, she said, holding up the screwdriver. He laughed. That's the most honored tool in the shop now. Rick walked over next. You staying long? She shook her head. Just dropping in. Heading to Cambridge soon. There was a moment of stillness, then applause, low at first, then louder. Not forced. Not coordinated. Just real. Victor stepped out from Bay 3. Before you go, look at this. He pointed to a freshly rebuilt engine bay on an old 1966 GTO. We rewired it the way you suggested. Changed the way we map voltages across the relays. Works smoother now. Jeliah gave a small nod. Good. You got it. Trask emerged from his office, arms folded, but not tight this time. Morton. Mr. Trask, she said. He didn't fidget. Didn't perform. He just said, you changed this place. I didn't do it for that. I know. That's why it stuck. She nodded once. Then, without fanfare, she turned to leave. Wait, Trask called. She paused at the door. Don't forget, he said, you're always welcome back. She didn't respond immediately. She didn't need to. Finally, she smiled faintly and said, thanks. But I'm building something new. And just like that, she was gone. Back to the sunlight. Back to the road. The summer in Cambridge arrived like a fresh page, humid, alive, and dense with opportunity. The air was different, too, heavier with possibility than heat. Jeliah Morton stepped onto the MIT campus with the same quiet resolve she carried in the garage. She didn't announce herself. Didn't dress to impress. She came with a backpack, a toolbox, and the calm confidence of someone who already knew who she was. Her summer program was packed with students from all over the world, many of them older, some with stacks of awards behind their names. But within days, it became clear that Jeliah wasn't here to catch up. She was ahead. Her first workshop involved adaptive sensor design. She submitted a reconfiguration model that required 40% fewer components without sacrificing precision. Her instructor, a tenured PhD in mechatronics, stared at her presentation, blinking like he'd just read something in a new language. You built this? Yes. In what lab? My garage. Silence. Then, what made you think to use reverse pulse mapping? She shrugged. It made sense after I rebuilt a sensor from a Porsche relay pack. The default system ran too hot. It became a pattern. Every time she was underestimated, she quietly shocked the room. But unlike the garage in Arizona, this time no one laughed. They just listened. Back home, Donovan got calls from old clients, people who had heard the story. Some didn't believe it at first. Others wanted to meet her. Your girl's becoming a bit of a legend, one of them said. Heard she fixed a Ferrari with a smartphone and a screwdriver. Donovan just smiled. That's the short version. In her dorm, above her desk, Jeliah pinned the same framed certificate she got from Reese, honorary lead technician. Beside it, she placed a worn-out relay connector from that same Ferrari. Not to remember where she'd been, but to remind herself what people could be capable of, if they stopped looking down long enough to look around. One evening, as she was video calling home, Donovan asked her the question he'd been holding for months. "Do you think what you did back there really changed anything?" She leaned back in her desk chair, braid over one shoulder, the hum of campus life just outside her window. "Yeah," she said. "But not because of the engine." "Then what?" "They didn't see me coming. That's what changed. The next girl who walks into that shop won't have to earn respect with fire. Just tools." Donovan nodded, a soft pride in his eyes. "She's lucky," he said. "Who?" "The next girl." Jeliah smiled. "She won't need luck." Back at Trask Automotive, the days rolled on. The mechanic started holding Saturday clinics for local teens, kids who wanted to learn, regardless of background, gender, or GPA. Trask didn't make a big deal out of it. He just quietly funded new tools and set up a learning bay. Jameer led the sessions. Rick watched carefully, his teaching voice slowly returning. "Reese?" He hung that same photo of Jeliah in Bay 3, engine roaring, hands steady. Above it, another small plaque now read. "Built different. Taught us better." The shop wasn't perfect. But it was changing. And not because someone demanded it. Because someone showed what change looked like. And that's what stuck the longest. Not the sound of the engine roaring to life. Not the app or the coil realignment. But the silence that followed when every man in that garage had to admit. They'd been watching the wrong things all along. In a world where some people still judge by appearances, it only takes one quiet voice and one undeniable skill to rewrite the rules. Jeliah didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. And the world adjusted around her. If this story moved you, if you believe that talent and brilliance can come from anywhere, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories where the underestimated rise, and the world watches in awe. Sometimes you don't need to prove anything. You just need to show them who you already are.